Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Fred Warner, linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. Abercrombie has the new suits you need, plus all the collared shirts to go with them. The Abercrombie & Fitch Collins suit is the only suit you'll ever need for any occasion. Available in slim, classic, and athletic. Pair with a collared classic. Go with a soft, easy-to-wear sweater polo or a comfortable long-sleeve shirt. With so many different fits and fabrics, you can make a look that's completely your own. Add the Abercrombie & Fitch Collins suit and new collared shirts to every occasion this season. Shop online or in store.
Welcome back to Fine Tooning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Rep, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. Well, he and I are recording this week's episode on Sunday, March 23rd, and before we launch into all of that, Drew, your book, right? The Art of Amphibia drops the day this podcast goes live, right?
It's true. It's true. And I wanted to say that our Gallery Nucleusha, event is sold out, but there are still a few tickets for the... So cool. Jim, if you're in town, I will get you in. Don't worry. I will smuggle you in under my raincoat.
All right. There we go.
But the event at the Grove this weekend, or next weekend, I should say, on the 3rd, is there are still a few tickets available. So please, if you want to come say hi to me, to Matt, to some of the other amazing artists who are in this book, please come over and say hello, and we'll sign your book, and it'll be fun. So, yeah.
That is so cool. I am so happy to hear that. Cool. Okay, more to the point, I'm looking forward to getting my book on the day this podcast goes live, which, again, is March 25th. But other news today, folks, on the Sunday, again, March 23rd, when I'm recording this, Disney's live-action Snow White, which, as we mentioned on last week's show, has had a nearly 9-year journey to the screen, finally opened in North American theaters. And again, as we mentioned on last week's show, we were talking about how the original box office projections for this live-action film had been revised downward. They were going from, an opening weekend gross in North America, 63 to 70 million. Those numbers were revised to 48 to 58 million. And, okay, so if the numbers that Drew and I are seeing this morning for Snow White's opening weekend box office, and again, apologies, folks, we're just working off of the projections for domestic box office here. We won't actually have the hard numbers for North American ticket sales till Tuesday, March 25th, same day Drew's book's coming out. It's a theme on this week's show, by the way, folks. Okay. But again, if the numbers we're seeing now, Drew, are true, Snow White didn't even meet those revised numbers. It only sold, 40 million worth of tickets in North America?
Yeah, something like that. And we were talking beforehand about how they were looking to clear 100 worldwide, and they are closer to 86, I think was the number I saw. So still enough to make it the number one movie of the week by a considerable margin, but definitely not the home run that Disney thought or hoped that it would be. But they've had a weird relationship with this movie, and it's had a somewhat tortured journey to the big screen. And I saw it on Tuesday last week. It's not bad. It's just so flavorless and so kind of ordinary that it does not leave a lot of a major impression. And also, Jim, there are about 500 new songs, which are just too many new songs.
Okay.
Too many, yeah. But Rachel is amazing. She's great. And, that's what's kind of a shame, is that the movie got so caught up in so many different kind of controversies and, personalities and all this stuff that shouldn't have affected it quite the way that it did. But
this is true. This is true. And I did also hear from another friend at Disney who, I guess by Saturday, they were getting a sense of, we're not going to make our numbers, but they were quick to point out that, the real irony here, Drew, is that there is this giant slate, late winter, early spring snowstorm that's been hammering Midwest. It dropped like 4 inches of snow. And so a lot of the theaters in that part of the country are underperforming because people just can't get to the theaters. And so it's like, wow, Snow White is... Snow is tripping.
That's how she gets her name. She was born during a snowstorm.
There we go. So, another interesting little bend on what difference between the 2025 version of the story and the 1937 original. Speaking of which, later on in today's show, we're going to talk about another big difference between the original hand-drawn Snow White and Disney's new live-action version of this same grim fairy tale, which, spoiler alert, has to do with a certain dwarf who previously hasn't been all that chatty. But first, the news. And as always, the news portion of Fine Tooning is brought to you by the DVC Rental Store. And if you're planning your next trip to the Walt Disney World Resort, you can save some serious money by renting DVC points through the DVC Rental Store. Imagine staying at a deluxe resort for a fraction of the cost. Total game changer. Oh, and if you already own or are thinking about joining the Disney Vacation Club, then be sure and check out the DVC resale market. They're the leader in the secondary market with over 70,000 satisfied customers. And whether you're looking to buy or sell your DVC points, they make the process seamless. Okay, so back to the news.
Wait, before we get into things, Jim, last week we talked about your birthday. You did not mention the hilarious video that you got from two of your favorite people on your birthday.
This is true. It's so weird you bring that up because what Drew is referring to is friend of the show, Josh Gad and Drew got together to wish me a happy birthday. Also razzed me about my 35-part series about, the Lakeshore Lodge which by the way, we're finishing in fact, the edition of Disney Dish that just dropped yesterday finally puts a button on that series. We're going to move on to a new topic.
Thank God.
Yes, our long national nightmare is over. But yes, Mr. Gad, and it was very sweet of the two of you to get together. Has he recovered from his cold yet, or do we?
I think so. He was just lying outside of his house. Yeah, because we were talking shop beforehand. But yeah,
okay.
So yeah. He's feeling better, but we had to do something to celebrate this.
Oh, it was very sweet. Event. And by the way, they coordinated this with Nancy, so this was very nice of the three of you to do this. And yes. What's funny is that just recently. In fact, I think on an upcoming edition of I Want That Too, I'm going to be talking about my first Disney celebrity-related interaction. Have I told you my John Stamos story, or...
No.
Oh, okay. That it involves an 8-foot-tall bodyguard who basically, is preventing me from interacting with John. We'll tell that story later. But anyway... back to the news, and let's talk about Moana 2 and its debut on Disney+. It, by the way, debuted on my birthday, March 12th, and in the first 5 days it was available on that platform, Moana 2 was viewed 27.3 million times, which makes this David Derrick Jr., Jason Hand, and Dana Ledoux Miller movie the third most successful Walt Disney Animation Studios theatrical film to hit Disney+. And by the way, the original Moana, which since Disney Plus debuted back in November 2019, has since gone on to become this streaming service's most streamed movie of all time, surpassing even the numbers that Frozen and Encanto have been viewed. And Drew, do you know which other film is very high up on that list?
I don't. You have to tell me, because I think that Moana is one of the most streamed movies ever. Like, not just on Disney Plus, but just of all time.
Yeah,
right?
but in the running is Pixar's Coco from November of 2017, which again, I guess we shouldn't be all that surprised, as part of this past week's shareholders meeting, Disney CEO Bob Iger announced that a sequel to that two-time Academy Award winner, and remember, it won for Best Animated Feature and then for that year's Best Song, Remember Me. But we have... well, first we had Disney announcing that Coco 2 would be arriving in theaters in 2029, 4 years and change, and then the company effectively scrubbed that info, right?
Yes, I wanted to bring this up. Thank you, Jim, for reminding me. Yeah, so in the earnings video, which was so slick, I don't know if you were watching, Jim, but it was pretty produced.
Okay.
But anyway, Iger said we have Coco 2 coming, and I had been tipped off about that. And if you actually go back and, not to toot my own horn, but if you read my Pete Docter interview from D23 last year, and we're talking about Elio, which we will talk about Elio in a moment, but he said, I pulled Adrian off of that to work on a different project. I think that was pretty clear then. So that's how I kind of knew that this was in the works. But yeah, the official Pixar account posted 2029 and then deleted any mention of 2029, which was interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that Iger didn't say that Lee Unkrich and Adrian Molina were coming back. They announced it on their respective social media channels.
They did. And thank you for bringing up the Lee Unkrich thing, because I want to remind folks that back in January of 2019, Lee announced that he was stepping away from Pixar Animation Studios. In fact, made an announcement to this effect that I'm not leaving to make films at another studio. Instead, I look forward to spending some much-needed time with my family and pursuing the interests that have long been backburnered. And, again, what was interesting about both this announcement, again, in January of 2019, and what was specifically said in this announcement is, well, all right, remember, John Lasseter is asked to step away from Disney and Pixar in November of 2017 due to allegations of inappropriate behavior. An official investigation begins June of 2018, though we never get an official what was discovered during this investigation. It's announced that Lasseter will be leaving Disney and Pixar at the tail end of that same year, 2018, and then in early January of 2019, it's announced that Lasseter is being hired by Skydance Animation to run that studio, and fairly early on, Drew, we heard a number of folks that John had worked with at Pixar and Disney were going to go over and work with him at Skydance, which is what made Lee's statement, which was released 10 days after it was revealed that Lasseter would be going to Skydance, that him flat out saying, I'm not going to go to work for another animation studio, and this is all about taking some personal time after working at Pixar for 25 years. But as you mentioned, also interesting that Molina is working on Coco 2, especially given what's been going on with Elio over the past 2 years, which Drew and I will discuss in depth in a moment. But first, this.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
And we're back. All right. Before we get into Elio-related stuff, Mr. Taylor has something to share with the class, and that has actually quite a bit to do with what Lee Unkrich did with his personal time after he stepped away from Pixar back in January of 2019.
Absolutely. I just wanted to give a shout out to his Shining book that he wrote, which is absolutely great. It's also one of the last things that J.W. Rensler did before he sadly passed away. And the sort of consumer grade version of that is out now, Jim. It's about $100. You definitely need to pick it up. If you bought the Scarf, Gerald Scarf book, this is only a couple of bucks.
Well, there we go.
So, yeah, it's 2-volume, really nice. And then if you're curious about the earlier version of Coco that Jim and I often refer to on the show, I just want to selfishly plug the Mondo vinyl of Michael's amazing Coco score, because I did it with Lee and we kind of walk through that earlier version of the movie a little bit. And I learned some things talking to him. All of that stuff are in the notes. So, yeah, please do that if you want to know more.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about this new trailer for Elio, which just dropped last week. And again, reminder, this movie is coming out to theaters June 20th. And as Drew suggested a few weeks back when he, got to see that early footage from How to Train Your Dragon, don't be surprised if this movie moves its release date, which back then was June 13th. And sure enough, when the How to Train Your Dragon trailer dropped, a few days after that, Disney announced that Elio would shift from June 13th to June 20th, largely in the fears that might not do as well if there's a How to Train Your Dragon to go head-to-head with. But what's interesting about moving release dates is, Drew, it wasn't honestly all that long ago when Elio was first supposed to show up in theaters March 1st of 2024, some 13 months ago. And just want to remind folks, we first learned about Elio officially September of 2022 at the D23 Expo. And again, we learned that it was going to be directed by Adrian Molina, who had co-wrote the story and the screenplay for Pixar's Coco, which again, remind you, out in theaters November of 2017. And Elio's premise back then, Drew, all right, so help me out here. It's a little boy who somehow gets mistaken for the supreme leader of planet Earth. He gets abducted or recruited to be Earth's representative to the Communiverse, which is this intergalactic organization that's sort of a space version of the UN. And so, all right, again, Elio's premise early on is a sci-fi adventure that's kind of married to a mistaken identity comedy. 10-year-old boy mistaken for Earth's leader, and he has to keep this ruse going. He's a young, guileless, unsophisticated average kid, but he also has to be serving Earth.
We have to keep in mind that he was also, if you'll remember from D23, described as an indoor kid. And this was also a very autobiographical story from Adrian Molina, who is a gay man. And I think that was part of that story, was sort of him being an outsider and knowing that he was different and finding that community that he was looking for, if you are catching my drift,
okay,
from
right.
A group of colorful characters. And I think that's... that has been sort of changed. If you watch the new trailer, it's very different than the description you are.
No. That's it exactly. I did not catch the subtext earlier, but okay. That also, given what's been going on at Pixar lately, for example, the Kai storyline for Win Lose. Yes. All right. So anyway, again, we got this kid who has to serve Earth's best needs. He has to prove that our planet should be allowed to have a seat at the table with this literally out of this world organization. And again, when you hear that original premise, you go, oh yeah, that sounds like a Pixar movie, sort of, but that's not what the folks up in Emeryville. I guess they sort of agreed with that statement, But again, obviously there was some discussion, and Elio needed some refining and refocusing. But we get that first trailer. If you want to see that iteration of the film or get a sense of what it would have been like, that comes out June of 2023. It's paired with the theatrical release of Elemental. Then in October of that same year, 2023, we learned that Elio's release date has now been pushed back to June of 2025. And at that time, we were told it was the SAG-AFTRA strike that was really causing this. There
had been issues before, but that was sort of the scapegoat. And then at D23 they announced the new creative team, which is Madeline Serafian and of course our favorite Domi Shi.
There we go. And those of you who aren't from, of course, Domi is the talent associated with Turning Red, which arguably one of the better Pixar films in the last 5 years or so. And Madeline Serafian, she actually did the Pixar Spark short, Burrow, came out in December of 2020. And during their time writing her on this film, it looks like this A Child Shall Lead Them tale has become more of a buddy comedy, which, look, this is the thing. If you think about the Pixar wheelhouse and Buzz and Woody, Sully and Mike Wazowski, Marlon and Dory, buddy comedies are something that Pixar is historically good at. I have to.
Well, it's actually it's combining the two Pixar tropes, which was pointed out to me by someone, which is the Midnight Run buddy comedy,
okay,
and then the Billy Elliot disapproving parent comedy. They have now been synthesized into one amalgamation, and that is Elio, because both Elio's aunt, I think she is now,
yes, Zoe Saldana. In fact, I love
Zoe Saldana, recent Oscar winner, and then the Slug's father, who in the earlier trailer was just a member of the universe.
That's it exactly. In fact, thank you for pointing that out. The Brad Garrett voices that character, and in the first trailer, he's effectively one of the other representatives at the Communiverse, and there's a couple of funny exchanges between him and Elio, but now he sort of appears to be the de facto villain.
Yeah.
Glorden's dad, I think.
Yes. Also interesting that we have the two lead characters, one eye between the two of them. Elio has an eye patch, and this other slug has no eyes. So it's the Tremors buddy comedy we always wanted.
Look, long story short, I have to admit, I like this trailer. And as you just pointed out, it very much fits in the Pixar wheelhouse. And also worth noting, in fact, by the way, if you haven't watched the making of Win and Lose limited series over on Disney Plus, Pete Docter once again describes how it's kind of the Pixar business plan that we're making a movie, it then falls apart midway through, and then rebuild it. So Elio is pretty much staying true to form.
Yeah, that documentary is great, by the way. I co-sign on that recommendation. Yeah. It is very warm and fun, and really cool look at how they made it.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I love the fact that they point out that the difference here is it takes us, 4 years to make a movie, and here we were making something that was almost twice the length of a movie, and you only got 2 years. Go.
Yeah.
Again, very much worth watching. I also am kind of intrigued by the parallels between the Andrew Stanton story and what just happened with Adrian Molina, and that as Drew wrote about at length over at The Wrap about the making of John Carter, Andrew's live-action debut, and how it came into theaters back in 2012 and seriously underperformed, but all was forgiven at Disney corporate. No blame was ever placed at Andrew's feet when this big-budget version of Edgar Rice Burroughs' book didn't do the numbers that people were hoping for, with the understanding that, just as long as Andrew immediately began working on a Finding Nemo sequel, all would be forgiven. And sure enough, Finding Dory arrives in theaters just 4 years later, 2016. And also worth noting that Andrew is now hard at work on Toy Story 5, which is due out in theaters June of next year. So I just want to point out, it's nice to have two Pixar old-timers like Andrew and Lee working on these upcoming prequels.
It is fun, yeah. And did you? They had a screening of Toy Story 5 at the studio last week that apparently went over very well. So things are going very swimmingly on Toy Story 5.
Okay,
So,
I mean, I have to admit, from the outside, hearing the overarching story, the notion of toys versus tech, and then that whole container ship thing full of evil Buzz Lightyears, it's like, from the outside, it's like, how is this going to work? But I'm happy to hear that.
In Andrew we trust, and also Andrew has another live action movie coming out this year from Searchlight Features. So I'm very curious about that. It's called In the Blink of an Eye, and it's sort of a time traveling romance. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great news. That's great news. But to get back to what we were talking about earlier, what do you make of the 2029 release date being scrubbed?
I don't know. That's a great question. I think they might just be a little gun shy about announcing things that don't come to fruition. Newt, things like that. Gigantic. I think that it might just be a little bit of that.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously this is going to happen. Like, Lee's back in the building.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's just that maybe there are a couple of titles that might be a little bit more modular. We haven't gotten a release date for Incredibles 3 yet. There's things like that. So I think they're just kind of hedging their bets a little bit. But I would imagine that 2029 date, you stick to it.
Okay.
And also a good reminder of just how long these movies take.
No,
It's
they
just
do.
insane.
They do. Though, speaking of how long movies take and then how long they take to actually get released to theaters, what do you make of this Coyote versus Acme news with supposedly Ketchup Entertainment reportedly offering Warner Brothers Discovery $50 million for the theatrical rights to this previously supposedly destroyed film, right?
I know. Somebody had a backup, Jim.
Okay.
Clearly, somebody had a backup. But like that morning, I think it's fair for me to say that nobody had heard this. Nobody on the filmmaking side, I should say.
Okay.
But everyone's sort of just waiting with bated breath because this is the first, real deal that they have entertained. If you read my report from last year, there were bids for it, and for whatever reason, Warner Brothers just didn't want to accept those bids. But yeah, I mean, this is much lower than what they wanted a year ago.
Yeah,
I don't know
70.
if they're just
I wanted to say that was the number I was hearing bandied about. And I have to say, speaking of lower numbers, given that the day the Earth blew up, a Looney Tunes movie, which, by the way, Ketchup bought the distribution rights from Warner Brothers Discovery after they effectively orphaned that movie. it's a funny film. It's a really, really funny film, but it's not doing all that well at the domestic box office. So it's like, so you, on the heels of that one not doing well, oh, here's $50 million. Give us Coyote versus Acme.
Yeah, I don't know what the long con is there, because you're right. I think it made like $5 million last weekend. It'll make a couple more probably this weekend.
Yeah.
But it cost them $15 to acquire, and then, marketing and everything afterwards. I don't know if they're making kind of a longer play for the IP or what, because as we talked about last week, they deleted all of the the original shorts from, I think, 1930 to 1969.
Yeah,
those are all gone. Yeah,
it's a strange situation. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
Someone else needs to chime in.
But on the other hand, I am just so thrilled, especially after given the people who worked in this movie who talked about how good it was, and that there's now a possibility we're finally going to get to see it. So just really paying close attention to that. But anyway, we were just talking about Snow White's somewhat underwhelming box office, but also just want to point out that Mufasa, when it opened in theaters in December of last year, actually made $10 million less over its opening weekend than Snow White has. That was 35, and then went on to make $700 million worldwide. So just kind of want to stress here that, all those folks who are so eager to paint this as a failure, just remember what we all had to do with Elemental. Just everybody was so busy dancing on the grave of that Peter Song film, and then later that summer had to come back and say, okay, so it made $500 million. So I guess it did. It was actually a success. So
yeah. And Mufasa is on Disney Plus next week, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, but speaking of Disney and Snow White and doing things live action, when Drew and I get back from this break, we're going to talk about a number of times that Disney tried to do something on the live action street with the little princess. But first, this.
Lowe's knows what makes SpringFest savings even better are member-only doorbuster deals. Right now, rewards members can save $40 on an Allen & Roth Chesler Gold faucet. Was $99, now $59. Plus, save $110 on a Cobalt 40-volt battery trimmer and blower combo kit. Was $279, now $169. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 3/24 while supplies last. Program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was getting frustrated by your forms. Now, Taxes is uploading your forms with a snap, and a TurboTax expert will do your taxes for you. One who's backed by the latest tech, which cross-checks millions of data points for absolute accuracy, all of which makes it easy for you to get the most money back, guaranteed. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
And we're back. Okay, folks, Drew and I have previously on Fine Tooning talked about, again, how Disney's live-action Snow White had a 9-year journey to the big screen. This project was originally announced back in October of 2016, but Drew, what a lot of people don't recall is some 6 months previous to that announcement, we're talking March of 2016. Do you remember when Disney announced that they were going to do, a movie that was directly adjacent to their 1937 version of Snow White? Did you recall the movie they wanted to make about Snow White's sister, Rose Red?
I do remember that. And I remember it being kind of a weren't there sort of multiple fairy tale characters that were supposed to be
There
in that?
we go.
Okay.
There we go. By the way, what's kind of interesting about this project is it was initially championed by Evan Doherty, who just 4 years earlier had written the screenplay for Universal's own take on this fairy tale character, Snow White and the Huntsman, Charlize Theron as the Evil Queen, Chris Hemsworth as the Huntsman, and Kristen Stewart as Snow White. And there was evidently a script that had been written by Justin Mers for Rose Red. And but where this got interesting is, and as Drew mentioned, it was going to be, I kept hearing it was kind of Into the Woods meets Wicked.
Right.
The notion it was sort of like Snow White was happening in the background, and you had these other fairy tale characters who were helping out or hindering the story. But at the same time, just the year previous was when the very first big live action redo of a classic Disney film, Cinderella, had come out in March of 2015 and made buku bucks. And in fact, it's by the way, if you want to get a window into that time, Drew wrote a wonderful piece. Your interview with Sean Bailey, that's at the Wrap, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That was on Vulture.
Okay.
Or New York Magazine. So yeah, you can still find that there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it was propelled by Alice in Wonderland in 2010.
Yep.
And then obviously Maleficent, I think, was 2014.
Thereabouts.
So
yep.
they had definitely gotten their toes. But yeah, at the time they were sort of going a little bit more sideways, and Cinderella was like, oh, we can just straight up, remake these, and they'll make $500 million, no problem.
No,
yeah,
that's it exactly. And that was the thing. It was evidently there was an argument in house to the effect of, well, how much of Snow White, the 37 film, can we show? What can we be doing with Rose Red? And eventually it just got down to, well, why don't we just make Snow White? Why are we trying so hard? Let's just make Snow White. So Rose Red is still somewhere in there. Now, mind you, in fact, Drew reached out this week to remind me that this wasn't the first time that Disney had looked at doing something with the 1937 film, but reimagining it. And in fact, Brian and I talked a little bit about this on the most recent Looking at Lucasfilm, and this is Snowstar. But my problem with the Snowstar story is there's only really one source on this thing, and it's that Starlog article that where they sat down with Ron Miller, and it's just, I want to say he did an interview with Starlog like 3 months before The Black Hole came out in December of 1979, and was talking about how Disney had the ACES system, this amazing new visual effects system that could move mats and that sort of thing, and how they were really anxious to take advantage of everything that they'd learned to do another sci-fi related project. And this was going to be a version of Snow White that was inspired by Star Wars in that. But it's Snow White more in the Princess Leia vein, and when she escapes from the evil queen, who's kind of Darth Vader in a dress, she ends up on a remote mining colony where the staff is left, and the only people who are left running the thing are 7 little droids. Which, did Disney steal that idea outright from Silent Running, the Bruce Dern movie?
Yeah. Well, I mean the droids in Black Hole are very Silent Running adjacent as well.
You're not wrong.
It sounded like kind of a Krull kind of thing, where it was sort of mixing fantasy and sci-fi.
It was. Yeah. But again, the weird part of the story is, in hindsight, they literally sent The Black Hole out into theaters. I want to say it opened on the exact same day as Star Trek The Motion Picture. And so you had these two sci-fi films out at the box office at the same time, and they effectively cannibalized each other's box office. And the weird part of the story is Disney then pivots to like, all right, we won't do outer space, we'll do cyberspace, which is how we get Tron in 82. And weirdly enough, later this year, we're going to see the third installment of that series. By the way, what are you hearing about Ares?
I was with Yoakum and that team a lot over the kind of award season because I hosted a bunch of Q&As for Young Woman in the Sea, which is on Disney Plus, and I highly recommend. I don't know, did you ever watch that, Jim?
Is this the distance?
Daisy Ridley?
Yeah. The Channel Swim one.
Yes.
I hear that's amazing.
It's great. But yeah, I mean, I think like we were doing something one night and he was like, we have a test screening, the next night and, wherever, Pablo Hills, Arizona or whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, it seems to be going well. They did some pickups recently back in Canada and everyone's super excited about it. I think the kind of like Nine Inch Nails component people are really jazzed about. And it's coming. Listen, this is talk about 10 years on. There were 2 separate pre-production phases for a Tron Legacy sequel in 2011 and 2015. And now it is finally happening. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping this one delivers the goods. So,
you saw the D23 footage, right? It was good.
Oh, I don't know. Again, remember.
Oh, you were not.
I was
blessed.
There we go. I was not an influencer.
Yes.
I did not make the list this year. So no, I didn't see the footage. So
it's very cool. It was a highlight, I thought, of the live action presentation.
Okay.
So
yeah. Well, that's what I want to hear. But now, mind you, I did back in the early 2000s get to see some test footage for another aborted Disney project. We were just talking about the 2 earlier attempts at doing a Tron 3. And did you ever get to see anything from Dwarves, the thing that what was it, Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment was going to make that trilogy prequel?
I heard about the kind of Conan the Barbarian test footage.
Yeah.
And there is some footage of them in CG that was from that project, which looked really good. I think TV animation was going to do it.
Absolutely. No, it looked amazing. And by the way, what Drew is referring to, the Conan footage, is that there's an image, if you know the end of the first Conan film, where Schwarzenegger is the old Conan on his throne, sitting there sort of just looking old and defeated, an old king. What was interesting about the Dwarves test is they had, again, there's no other way to explain it. It's Grumpy in the exact same position on a throne. It was going to be all about the elaborate history that the dwarves actually had with the evil queen. In fact, it all keyed off of that moment where Snow White's in the cottage and says, well, it was sent into the forest by the queen. And the dwarves admit, the queen! As if like, oh no, not her again. And you learn things like, for example, the reason that Dopey doesn't speak is that he's traumatized because his parents were killed in front of him. And it was very much of the period of, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings had just come out, and it was like, we could do something like that with the dwarves, right? People, look at what Jackson just did with dwarves. People love dwarves. And boy, that project, didn't that basically die in the same window of time with like Aristocats 2 and that sort of thing when Lasseter came through the door?
Yeah, there was, what was there? I think Bambi 2 was made, but there was something else, Dumbo 2 or something.
Oh, yeah.
There was another.
There were a bunch of them that frankly, Lasseter just felt you're undermining the value of these wonderful films. And so that project got killed. But by the way, the first time Dopey talked was actually in the stage show of Snow White, the thing that Disney did at Radio City Music Hall back in the fall of 79. I want to say they did 38 performances of this, just in a weird sort of way, dead on replication on stage of Snow White from 37. And what's interesting is there was a VHS of this that came out in 1980. Did this wind up on Disney Plus?
I don't think so, because I was writing about Snow White earlier this week, and I was looking into finding any. I mean, that talk about a black hole of media. That stage show is like very difficult to parse online.
Yeah, and the irony is that you head over to eBay. Now, mind you, you have to buy a VHS and then buy a VHS machine to actually run it on, but it does, in fact, exist, at least in that space. But yeah, I got it near as I can figure, that's the only way you can watch it today. And by the way, though, ironically enough, supposedly the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, at the request of the Walt Disney Company, actually cleaved off of their archival copy of the broadcast of the 61st Academy Awards. This is the infamous one that opened with Snow White on the stage with Rob Lowe performing Proud Mary. Did you ever get to see that? Yeah.
I never saw it, but it is spoken about in hushed tones by Oscar enthusiasts everywhere. Yeah.
Well, this is evidently Alan Carr, who was the producer of that year's Academy Awards, and more to the point, because he was the producer of the movie version of Grease, which then was the highest-grossing movie musical of all time. So it was just one of these things where when Alan said, we're going to do this musically, people are like, well, I guess he knows what he's doing. And so, all right, he wants to stage a musical number and a recreation of the Coconut Grove, and Rob Lowe and Snow White are singing, and everybody signed off on it, including Disney, by the way. That's the interesting part of the story. Disney had to actually look at the costume that the actress was going to be wearing when she went out on a stage. But they didn't know what number she was going to be doing or how she'd interact with Rob Lowe. But I just recently, Drew, got a copy of Bruce Village's book. It seemed like a bad idea at the time. And that Academy Award, the 61st, was the very first time that he wrote for the Academy Awards. And so he had a front row seat to everything that was going on here. And what Bruce reveals in his book, which, by the way, comes highly recommended, if only because it also takes you behind the scenes on the Star Wars Holiday Special, which he also had a hand in. He talks about what Disney was actually mad about. And in fact, the very next morning, they threatened the Academy with a lawsuit, and the Academy was forced to issue an apology, is that, well, what Bruce describes is Frank Wells was upset because, well, again, this is a broadcast March 31st, 1989. In a month and change, Disney MGM Studio theme park is going to open in Florida. And so Disney thought, oh, what a perfect show to promote our new theme park on, because it's a salute to Hollywood. It's movie themed. And the Academy turned down the ad, saying, no, that's a little too on the nose. It's a little too naked. You can't do that. And so Frank is sitting there at home watching this, and in, I want to say, the closing hour of that year's broadcast, suddenly a Chevrolet commercial comes on. And do you remember the Chevy ads that were shot at Disney MGM before it opened, and they were done kind of Roger Rabbit-y with the classic, like, for example, they showed the hippos from Fantasia climbing into one car to show how roomy it was, or
yeah, I remember the cars would always pull up in front of the Chinese theater.
There we go.
Come out.
All right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: in the closing hour, when people have effectively bailed out, here's an ad for a Chevy that's actually shot at Disney MGM. And to make matters worse, it's the ad for the new Chevy SUV, and they to show how it can hold 7 passengers. The door slides open, and here come the 7 dwarves. And it's like, oh, come on. We let you use our character. You won't let us advertise the park, but you let Chevy place this ad. And so that's why Disney rattles its saber the next day. And the Academy apologizes and removes this archival footage. And then weird little bend on the story. If we jump ahead to the Academy Awards of 4 years later, 1993, a hand-drawn Snow White comes out on stage in a new, designed just for this event, but kind of reminiscent of what she wore in 37 outfit. And she's the one who presents the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. And it's like, oh, all right. I guess we were upset until we weren't upset. So
now trailers during the Academy Awards happen all the time.
There we go.
Well.
There we
They
go.
have loosened their stance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of short, it is now just a short 2 months till Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning opens in theaters on May 23rd. And of course, in preparation for this, Drew and Charles Hood over on their wonderful Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, have been walking us through the earlier films in the series. We were talking a bit ago about Ghost Protocol, and what are we up to now?
So I think this week is Fallout, Mission Impossible Fallout. So yeah, we're getting close. The bell tolls for thee soon enough, Jim.
Cool.
Hopefully, we'll have some new news out of CinemaCon in a couple of weeks, and then it's off to the races.
Now, speaking of which, are you headed that way, or
if I am, I will only be there for the Paramount presentation. But
okay, because I just want to point out that supposedly, isn't that where the world premiere of How to Train Your Dragon is going to be held? Didn't I see something like that?
I have already reached out and said, can you play that for those of us who aren't going? But hopefully I will be seeing it very soon after. But yeah, I'm very anxious to hear what people think and what that early word of mouth is. Because
can't wait.
They're showing the whole thing. That's confidence,
No,
Jim.
That's confidence. That's confidence. All right, and speaking of podcasts, we have a few of them here we'd like you to check out. We, of course, have Disney Dish that I do with Len Testa. That's our theme park news and history podcast. Likewise, we have the Epic Universal podcast, which I do with Eric Hersey, who produces a number of shows here, and that's, of course, about the Universal parks and their films. We also have I Want That Too, which is our Disney merch podcast, which I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. Brian Gaughan and I just recorded a brand new Looking at Lucasfilm last week and are getting ready to get another one in the hopper, especially out ahead of what's going to be revealed at WonderCon this coming weekend. Let's see. Also want to remind you that we host here Manufacturing the Magic, which is a theme park history podcast that's done by Noah and Shelley Valladolid. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Disney Unpacked. That's our Patreon project that Len and I do with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul. And our most recent episode was about Tom Sawyer's Island. Later this week, we're going to be recording a brand new episode, which, are kind of appropriate for what we're talking about today. Talks about how the Disney parks have kept Snow White evergreen over the past 70 years. And anyway, as Drew and I head out the door here, just a quick thank you to Eric Hersey and David Gray for the great job they do producing this podcast. Want to also ask you folks to please do Drew and I a favor. Head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, well, not just this show, but also Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. And, all right, just a quick nod in the direction of social media. Drew, where can the nice folks find you?
They can find me at Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt, on Instagram and Twitter mostly. And yeah, reach out Send us the Snowstar script that you have locked in your basement, please.
Or Rose Red. I would love.
Or Rose Red.
Yeah,
yes,
I'd love to get my hands on a copy of Rose Red. But speaking though of social media, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And again, I know we keep saying this, but yes, I know the wildfires in Southern California were now a month or two ago, but lots of folks are still dealing with the after effects. In fact, I've been talking with friends who are still dealing with the issues of their living in temporary housing that doesn't necessarily allow their pets, and and that's a stressor. So look, if you're in a position to help, please make a donation to the American Red Cross,
and look up that ASIFA one that they're doing.
That's right. The auction.
The auction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So go to asifa.org and
excellent
look at that.
suggestion. Excellent suggestion. Okay. Well, anyway, on behalf of Mr. Taylor, thanks for listening to this week's Fine Tuning, and we will be back soon.